If you are here for hosting novel studies to engage readers, you are in the right place. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides here. Fantastic. Welcome. I'm excited to be here with you all, although to be honest, a little bit nervous, so don't go too hard on me. I love teaching reading, so I thought to myself, okay, so if I'm going to be hosting a thing, I should probably talk about what I really love, which is reading and using novels with the kids. I love using lots of different books with the kids. I feel like that's really important. So hence hosting novel studies to engage your readers. So just a couple of reminders while we're working today. Camera's on, mute unless you're her speaking. I do have the chat available. We'll be willing to listen and share different ideas, take responsibility for your learning, listen, take risks, and be digitally responsible. A little bit about me, your host. It's weird to say that. So I am actually an MCPS graduate. I went through MCPS from Strawberry Knoll Elementary to Gaithersburg Middle and all the way to Gaithersburg High School. And then I got my bachelor's from Salisbury University. I finished my master's about 2 months ago in elementary literacy instruction. And this is my 5th year as a classroom teacher for MCPS. Prior to that, I was a substitute. So I think being a substitute was one of the most valuable experiences I could have done, because it gave me the chance to see how other teachers run their classrooms and how do they operate, which I think is what gave me a lot of ideas on how to run my own novel studies. I spent 3 years in kindergarten, and I'm now in my 2nd year in 4th grade. So hopefully what I'm sharing is still helpful to you, even if you're in secondary. Hey, I'm seeing it through the lens of I taught kindergarten and then I moved to 4th grade. My school is departmentalized. So I teach reading all day long to my kids, which I, of course, adore. But just so that way it gives you some perspective about where I'm coming from when I'm sharing today. I love reading, I love singing, and I love Disney. Just a few fun things. All right. So lots and lots of books are out there in the world. What is a novel that you remember reading in school? Drop it in the chat. What's a novel that you read in school? Maybe it was one that you remember from elementary school. Maybe it's a novel that you just read for fun. Maybe it's a novel that you read about how in school and read as a group. Maybe it was from high school or middle school. What's a novel that you remember reading in school that you really enjoyed? Ooh, lots of really good ones. Tuck Everlasting, Catcher in the Rye, Matilda, Tale of Two Cities, Out of the Dust, Because of Winn-Dixie, Mice and Men, Where the Red Fern Grows, Tale of Two Cities, Lord of the Flies, yep, Harriet the Spy, Charlotte's Web. Ooh, God, you all have read some good books. Ooh, lots of really awesome books on here. My Antonia, A Wrinkle in Time, The Hobbit, Wind in the Willows. Ooh, awesome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sharing. I know I love books in general. Hatchet, yep. I'm seeing a lot of familiar books on here from when I read through MCPS and what I like to read with my own my own students, I should say. I know that through elementary school, we did a lot of novel studies, and we read a lot of books. And that was one of my favorite things as a kid, because I got to share about it with all of my friends. Hence, it gave us something common to talk about. And it got me thinking about lots of different kinds of experiences that I might not have otherwise, which is really cool. I know, what did I love reading? Mouse and the Motorcycle was a big one that I read, I think in 3rd grade, I read that. I read Esperanza Rising. Hatchet was one that I remember reading. Lots of amazing books out there. And I want to be able to share that with our kids. Number the Stars. Yep. I remember that one. And lots of amazing books. And I think it's important to share that with the kids. So novel studies, I feel like they are very important to the kids for them to get exposed to lots of different kinds of literature. They can be really engaging. even if it's something that you, the teacher, are picking for the kid and giving it to them, it's something different. And the benchmark reading curriculum that a lot of us have been using, it's lots of close reads, which is great, and lots of literature about how that can be great for the kids. But it also only gives them a small snapshot. It doesn't give them that whole book so they can see what things like the plot development and the characters grow. Differentiation is another big one. I know that we may assign books based on ability level and giving those students who need the enrichment a more challenging text, giving those students who might need a little bit more encouragement and something that may not challenge them as much. I know it builds classroom community. So many wonderful conversations in my room because the kids are excited to know, oh, what are you reading? What comes next in the book? Have you gotten to the part where? Helps them build lots of different skills, as well as their communication, because then they want to talk about the book. And meeting with groups gives them the chance to talk about it as well, to answer questions, to ask questions. It's also a really authentic way to learn new vocabulary. Even my high readers, I give them a text and they go, oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? And it's a really great way for them to be exposed to all of this content in a really authentic way. There are lots of things to think about when you're picking books for your kids. And you may or may not be able to meet all the requirements. You just have to figure out, okay, what works for me? What works for my kids? I think that's the biggest thing when thinking about what books to choose. What skills are you trying to teach them? What standards are you trying to meet? Okay. Are the novels you're reading aligned with a particular theme or content? I know we dive into characters a little bit more, and so I try to pick books with strong characters during that unit. Difficulty level, particularly if you plan to differentiate and create groups of students, hence based on their ability. How advanced is the vocabulary? How advanced is the comprehension, the context that you're reading? Hey, you have to think about, oh, if this book takes place in 1940, I need to give my kids that context. They need to understand, what does that mean? What's going on during this time period, or even that part of the world? Is the book relatable to kids? Does it have a character that is of their age or has something else going on? Is it interesting? Are there lots of diverse characters in the books? I know that my school in particular, Lakewood Elementary, has had a lot of trainings about diversity, and I love making sure that my kids read about diverse characters. I also like making sure they read diverse characters that are relatable to them. My school primarily has a high Asian population, and so I try to find texts that they can relate to that feature some of those Asian characters. Of course, book availability. Not every book room has every single book we may want, and that can be frustrating, but also it makes it so we don't have the entire world to choose from, which might be a little intimidating. The length of the text. I know one error that I did this past year was I gave one group of children a book that was about 150 pages, and the other two groups were reading about 250. So that was fun. But then how are you going to balance that out? When the kids reading the shorter text have finished, what are they going to be doing? Are they going to read a short story, or are they going to start the next novel? And then, of course, familiarity with the text. Is it something that you're familiar with or the kids are familiar with? The kids tend to be more engaged with books they haven't read before. I know that it's easier for me personally if I've read the text before, because then I can see, okay, what kinds of vocabulary are they going to struggle with? Is there a particular part that I want to focus on? Okay. All right. There are lots of ways to structure your groups. So two big ones that I personally have worked on are guided reading groups. And then this past year, I've been working with literature circles. Guided reading is probably one that many of us are familiar with, teacher-led, lots of structure for the kids. And then, of course, literature circles are more recent, at least for me. And they are more student-led, and they're a bigger opportunity for students to practice their skills independently. So guided reading is really good for your younger kids. It's very teacher-led, structured, phonics, vocab, comprehension, and the meeting schedule may vary. I know I did guided reading a lot in kindergarten when I was down there. I had about an hour and I met with 3 groups a day, and that varied. Some groups I met with once a week, some groups I met with every single day, depending on what their needs were. And we worked on phonics, we worked on vocabulary, we worked on comprehension. But I know that that might not be as much of a need in the older grades. So hence why I'm trying out literature circles. When you're doing guided reading, the kids have to have something to do. You can't meet with every single child in the classroom at once. Otherwise, it's not a small guided reading hoop, really. So what are some things that we can do as teachers to keep the kids occupied while we're meeting with groups? One option would be centers. In kindergarten, I had a lot of different centers: listening center, word work, independent reading. Was not so much independent reading in kindergarten, but exposure to books. Independent work is another great way to keep kids focused on what they need to do. Maybe that's answering questions about the book independently. Maybe it's some other activities you have going on in the classroom. Choice boards are another great way to keep kids occupied. Instead of "you must do this," instead, you have these 3 or 4 choices, choose one, right? And I do have a center rotation and sample linked, and a choice board that I use in kindergarten linked. And I noticed that we want my slides, so I'll drop my link in the chat one more time. There it is. Okay. There we go. All right. So literature circles are something that are newer to me. They're more student-led, and it's really good for building their independence. Students have certain jobs and roles in the literature circles to hold themselves accountable. And I know, at least in my room, we've been meeting roughly once a week. So to give you an example for kinds of jobs that might be available to the kids, I know one of my jobs is discussion director, and their job is to come to group of questions and sort of lead the discussion with the other students. Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and we're going to go around the circle, and each of us answer the question. Okay. Other jobs might include things like word wizard, who find interesting words in the text. You might find I have an artistic artist who illustrates a major event from the chapters assigned, and then they talk about, why did I pick this? What am I showing here? Just to get a visualization on paper. I know I have a creative connector. They make connections to self or to the world or to another text they may have read previously. All different ways to keep the kids engaged and give them something meaningful, but also to build that independence. Like I mentioned, it is, at least for me, easier to say, okay, it's Friday, we're going to meet with our literature circles, so everyone get with their groups and get started, so that way I can be walking around monitoring all the groups. That being said, definitely takes a little bit more training. So that way the kids get to that independent level where they are leading the discussion about the book and not getting as distracted. No matter if you're meeting with guided reading groups or with literature circles, I think one of the biggest things is just in the world do I plan this? How do I figure this out? I know that there's a million and one ways. I think the biggest thing that is important is being organized, being flexible, being prepared, and considering your timing. And I included linked samples to some of my plans from the past, one from when I taught kindergarten virtually with my guided reading groups, and a sample from more recently where I'm working on literature circles with my 4th graders. So the important part is being organized and knowing what you're doing and being willing to be flexible. So one example of flexibility, my 4th graders, I had some very eager beavers who were reading a mystery and could not stand the suspense. So they ran through that book and read it very quickly. And that's fine. We just had to adjust, okay, which chapters are you reading now instead of what I had planned originally? And that we made it work, and that was fine. Being prepared, making sure you have all the materials, obviously, being organized, considering timing, especially with novels, because they take a while, especially if you pick a thicker book for some of these younger kids. I know for me, we've done books more recently that have been about 250 pages, and that's taken about 5 weeks. And we need to factor in, oh, there wasn't school for students today, so are you going to give them an extra day to do this? Or, oh, there is no school on XYZ day. There's a field trip here. There's a break coming up. All of these things you need to consider when thinking about novel studies, because it isn't 1 week and done. It takes a few weeks to get going. And we also want to consider that when leaving a little extra time at the end. So that way the kids don't feel so stressed out if you need to extend a little bit more, so they don't feel as rushed. I happen to have a group of really, really fast readers, but I haven't always had a group of very fast readers who need a little extra time to read through the book and get their work done. And that's totally fine. But then you need to accommodate for that time somewhere. When picking books for kids, are you going to pick them, or is kids going to pick them? In the past, what I have done is I have gone into my book room and picked out my books and said, okay, the end. These are the books that we're reading. This is what you're doing. Done. More recently, especially this past year, what I've been doing is giving them more choice. So what I did for student picked books this past year is I personally picked, I believe it was 3 or 4 books, and I made a little slideshow and gave that kids access, and that their independent work that day was just, okay, look through the slideshow, read the description of the book, check out this little video with an interview from the author or a book review, and then fill out this Google form. Let me know what your first choice is, your second choice, your third choice. What would you pick? And to let me know if there's any books they have read, so that way they aren't reading the same book over again. Because rereading is wonderful, but we also want new experiences. So certainly if you're picking the books as the teacher, it's easier to differentiate and group kids a certain way, but it might also be less engaging for students because they might be reading a book that they've read before, maybe a book they aren't very interested in. Okay. Showing their learning, there's lots of ways for kids to show their learning. They can talk with their group. They can do some kind of follow-up assignment. They can do a written response in some kind of journal. They could do a quiz or some other kind of assessment. They could do a project. They could do reader's theater. They could do some other culminating activity. I know for me, for follow-up work, what I found over the years, there's a seller on Teachers Pay Teachers who has novel studies, and I personally love her work. I have that linked to it at the additional resources slide at the end. But I know that I've used that work in the past to help me out, kind of figure out, okay, what kinds of questions should I ask the kids? Is there some kind of independent work, some vocabulary that they could work on? I've done that in the past for follow-up work, but to also help guide me through what I need to do. You could always give them some kind of assessment. I know when I was in AP Language in high school, the teacher had us read a book and gave us just a generic assessment of, okay, who were the characters, what was the setting, what was going on, plot. And that kind of situation might be good for a quiz, especially if you're reading lots of different books with the kids or you have older students. Projects can be really fun. I had some of my 4th graders last year make a movie poster for their favorite novel, with the author, some kind of illustration. Reader's theater can be a lot of fun. I would recommend that for older students maybe, or structure it very well so that way the kids have somewhere to go. Lots of ideas for culminating activities. If there's some kind of art project in there, maybe he tie that in with the kids. Well, I know we've read books in the past that take place in certain locations, maybe exposing the kids to some of those cultural elements. And there are a million and one things to consider when thinking about novel studies. Will the activities be done paper pencil, or are we going to do them digitally? When we do this, do books stay home, or do they stay at school? Are they somewhere in between? I know when you don't let the kids take the books home, they sometimes get behind on the reading. But on the other hand, if we do let them take them home, sometimes the books get damaged or lost. One thing to consider with books is digital copies. I know I've discovered on Epic, there's actually a lot of books on there that are audiobooks, and a lot of my kids have been interested in that. I know that Had Epic for free only offers during school hours, but especially for a kid who might not be able to come into school, a digital copy or an audiobook might be good. I know a lot of my kids that had to be in quarantine in the past found that really helpful. How are you going to take grades? Is it going to be through follow-up work? Are you going to give them a quiz? Are you just going to take grades based on questions you ask? I know one way I took grades is I think of a standard, and that is my standard, and I pick a kid and I go, okay, this is the kid. I'm going to ask this question today. Can they do this? And I have a little checklist and I just check off, especially during guided reading. How will you organize your plans? Different people work differently. I know I've adapted to a digital whole model for my planners, since that's easier to share with my peers and collaborate with. As I mentioned, we're departmentalized, and the writing teacher at my school, we do a lot of collaboration there, and having digital planners helps us figure out, okay, how can we adapt this in a different way and make it work for both of us? What modifications can and or need to be in place for our ELL, for our SPED, for her GT? What kinds of modifications might need to be in place, and how are we going to achieve that? What technology do we have available? Are there other people with resources for you? I know I'm a younger teacher, and I wouldn't have been able to get novels off the ground if wasn't surrounded by lots of very experienced teachers who said, oh, I happen to have an extra 2 or 3 copies of this book. You can use that. Or, oh, I have a copy of this novel study that I did a few years ago. Check it out. Utilizing those resources is massive and really, really helpful. Okay. Giving us a lot to think about, I know. So I've got another question for the chat for you. What do you teach? Do you teach first grade, kindergarten, 4th, 5th, 7th, 9th? If you're a classroom teacher, what grade do you teach? Go ahead, drop it in the chat. What grade or what do you teach? Okay. Ooh, lots of upper grades teachers, media specialist. Lots of 3rd, 2nd. Awesome, looking good. I'm going to drop my link to my slides one more time. Fantastic. Okay. Awesome. So I've done my whole spiel, and I know that one of the biggest ways that I've grown is just hearing what other people have to say. I was a substitute teacher. I grew a lot by seeing, okay, how exactly does another teacher structure this? And just being able to talk with other people about what they do. So I would love to give you all the chance to do that. So I am going to actually set us up in breakout rooms. And when we're in breakout rooms, I've got a couple of questions for us to consider. Okay, so if you were to host novel studies, or maybe you already do, what kinds of books have you or would you read with your students? Maybe you're focusing on picking books that fit with your students' interests or their reading levels. Maybe what you're focused on is finding books with authentic kid characters. Okay. Question 2, what do you consider when picking books for students? Think about levels. Think about what you have available to you. What do you prioritize? 3, how will you or have you structured your groups in the past? Maybe it was more guided reading, maybe it was more literature circles, maybe something in between. And 4, how will students demonstrate their learning? They're going to take a quiz at the end of the book. Are they going to have discussions and be graded that way? How will you grade your students? Okay. Right. So we had a couple of questions to discuss while we were in there, right? Just to recap real quick. What kinds of books would you read with the students? What do you consider when picking books? How will you structure your groups? How will students demonstrate their learning? So I would love to take the chance to hear from a couple of people. Maybe let's start with question 1. What kinds of books have you read with students? What kinds of books do you read with your students? Maybe it's because it's what you have available in the book room, or they're books that you just cherish so much that you want to read them with your kids.
Well, this was kind of a question that was going on in our small group, is just like, if we wanted to kind of like go out a little bit from, the benchmark, but stay on topic with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of like, is it still okay? We have to get these books approved if we choose to use them as studies, because in our book rooms, we're finding that those novel studies are kind of going out, and they're like, kind of replacing them. We kind of want to build it back up. So like, for instance, one that I was looking at was Stone Fox. Like actually use those and like ask our reading specialists to get those books for us and then start there. How do we go about, building these novel studies up?
So one thing that I was very fortunate is there's a lot of experienced teachers at my school. I go to Lakewood, and a lot of teachers at the school knew I was a younger teacher going in and went, oh, I happen to have 5 copies of this. I have 3 copies of that, but I know she has 2 more copies. I looked at what was in the book room. I know my reading specialist was kind of planning to get more books. And I asked her, oh, what are you planning to get? Can I maybe help with that? And I know that certain schools in the county, they're also piloting certain programs, like, for example, our ELC program. I know my school is working on that. I know there's several other schools as well. And I know I've linked those lists in the additional resources. Those might be books that your reading specialists are gearing up to get or might already have available because of the ELC program in grades 4 and 5. Media specialists, of course, I see you. Our media centers might have copies of these books available for you.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Leah, I just wanted to share something that we talked about. I am teaching the ELC this year, and so that's new to me. And so thankfully with the ELC, there are a lot of novels that you get with the program. But something that I have learned is Sora, SORA, is on Clever, and there are a ton of novels on there, and every student can check out one at a time on their bookshelf. And so that is a great resource if you're finding that you do not have novels or don't have enough copies. They also have the audio version if you have a student, an ELD student that needs to have that read to them. So there are a lot of options on Sora.
That's awesome, and a good thing to know about. I know on Epic that I've had kids with finding audiobooks as well, and sometimes they'll use that as a resource. Lots of really great resources in there. Okay, we are running low on time, so I want to keep it really brief to close out. I do have an additional resources slide available for you all, just a couple of things that I found or I already had access to. I know the ELC program is specifically for enrichment students, but I know that, for example, our 5th grade HAID students, on grade level 5th grader might be ready for 4th grade level enrichment in text. And I know that there are certain other texts in there as well that are selected based on content or other her means, not necessarily the Lexile. For example, I know there were books on the grade 4 list that I have read with my on grade level students, but they are on the enrichment list. So it doesn't hurt to check it out. I know there are novel studies available on Benchmark. I'll let you explore any of these other resources at your leisure. There is a lovely participant survey for you to fill out. So I will drop that link in the chat. If my computer wants to allow me to do that, that would be lovely. Thank you. And I'll drop my slides one more time as well, just in case we needed those. Somebody did ask me about literature circle jobs, and I added my own slides for introducing those jobs to my students into the additional resources, if you are interested in that. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. But otherwise, I know you have a second session to get to by 45. So have a wonderful day.